Impossible creatures. Part 1. The magical world of the archipelago. Long ago, the world was filled with magic. Dragons soared through the skies, unicorns roamed the forests, and other mythical creatures lived freely among humans. Magic was everywhere, flowing through the earth, water, and air. It was a time when humans and magical creatures shared the world together. But as humans grew more powerful and developed advanced tools, cities, and weapons, they began to exploit the magical creatures. They hunted them for their magical properties, dragons for their scales and fire, unicorns for their horns, and many other creatures for the unique powers they held. Slowly, the magic of the world started to disappear. Magical creatures were driven to near extinction. Humans no longer believed in them and instead treated them as mere stories or legends. Over time, these creatures vanished from the human world, and only their stories remained, passed down in fairy tales, myths, and folklore. Dragons became creatures of fantasy, unicorns became symbols of purity, and other magical beings were forgotten completely. However, there was one place where magic never faded, a hidden group of islands known as the archipelago. This secret place, made up of 34 islands, became the last sanctuary for magical creatures. The archipelago is home to a vast range of creatures, from dragons and centaurs to griffins and unicorns. These islands are hidden from the rest of the world by a special magic known as glimmery. The glimmery acts as a shield, keeping the archipelago safe from human discovery and harm. No one can find these islands unless they know the secret ways, and even modern technology, like planes, satellites, and radar, cannot detect them. The archipelago is protected, and its creatures are free to live and thrive without fear. The glimmery is the life force of the archipelago. It flows through everything: the land, the sea, the air, and the creatures themselves. It is the reason why magic still exists in this secret place. The creatures of the archipelago are closely connected to the glimmery, and their existence depends on it. As long as the glimmery is strong, the creatures are safe, and the islands remain hidden. But if the glimmery fades, the magical creatures will die, and the archipelago will be exposed to the outside world. Part 2. Christopher Forrester and his special connection. The story then shifts to introduce Christopher Forrester, a young boy living in London. Christopher is not like other boys his age. He has a strange and unique ability. Animals are always drawn to him. Wherever he goes, animals seem to follow him. Cats wind around his legs, dogs leap up to greet him, and birds fly down to perch near him. Even wild animals, like squirrels and foxes, approach him without fear. This unusual connection has been a part of Christopher's life for as long as he can remember. While most people are surprised by it, Christopher has come to accept it as normal. However, Christopher's father does not feel the same way. His father, who has become cold and distant since the death of Christopher's mother, is uncomfortable with his son's connection to animals. He doesn't like the way animals seem to gather around Christopher, and he tries to keep them away. Christopher's father used to be more relaxed and loving, but after his wife's death, something changed in him. He became more anxious and controlling, particularly when it comes to protecting Christopher from danger. This includes keeping him away from animals, even though Christopher loves them. At the beginning of the story, Christopher's father has to go away for work. He tells Christopher that he will be spending the summer with his grandfather, Frank Oriot, who lives in Scotland. Christopher hasn't seen his grandfather in 9 years, and he isn't thrilled about the idea. He would much rather stay in London, where he's familiar with his surroundings. However, his father insists, and there is no other choice. So, reluctantly, Christopher agrees to travel to Scotland on his own. When Christopher arrives in Scotland, he meets his grandfather at the ferry terminal. Frank Oriot is an imposing figure, a tall, broad man with a strong Scottish accent and a rough exterior. Like Christopher, Frank also has a mysterious connection with animals. As they drive through the remote Scottish countryside, Frank points out the seagulls that follow his car, trying to steal his food. He laughs it off, but Christopher notices the same strange connection that he has with animals. Frank's house is located in a very remote part of Scotland, far away from any towns or neighbors. The house itself is old, covered in ivy, and surrounded by nature. A large hill rises behind the house, and the landscape is wild and untamed. As they arrive at the house, Frank makes one thing very clear to Christopher: he must never, under any circumstances, go to the top of the hill behind the house. Frank explains that the hill is dangerous, and his father insisted on this rule. Christopher is allowed to explore the lower parts of the hill, but he must not go beyond the line of trees that marks the halfway point. Christopher, being a curious boy, immediately wonders what could be so dangerous about an ordinary hill. The more his grandfather tells him not to go, the more intrigued he becomes. What could possibly be at the top of the hill that his grandfather is so determined to keep him away from? Despite his curiosity, Christopher agrees to follow the rule, at least for now. As Christopher settles into life at his grandfather's house, he begins to notice more strange things. The animals around the house seem to behave oddly, just as they do around him. He also notices that his grandfather has old, mysterious objects in the house, including strange books and ancient maps. These things make Christopher even more curious about his family's history and the secrets his grandfather might be hiding. Part 3. Mal Arvorian and the Dying Magic. In a different part of the world, on the island of Atadina in the archipelago, lives a young girl named Mal Arvorian. Mal is a spirited, adventurous girl who has a deep connection to the magical world around her. She lives with her great-aunt Leonore, who raised her after her parents died when she was very young. Mal is special because she has the ability to fly. She owns a magical coat that allows her to soar through the sky when the wind blows. Flying gives Mal a sense of freedom and joy that nothing else can. She often spends her days flying over the forests of Atadina, exploring the beautiful, magical landscape. The island of Atadina is home to many magical creatures, including unicorns, griffins, and other mystical beings. Mal loves observing these creatures, and she feels a deep connection to them. She has even befriended some of the creatures in the forest. However, lately, Mal has noticed something very troubling. Some of the magical creatures in the forest have been dying unexpectedly. She has found several dead animals, including a baby unicorn and a rare bird with metal claws. This is highly unusual, as the creatures of the archipelago are supposed to thrive in this magical land. Even more concerning is that the soil in parts of the forest has started to change. In some places, the rich, brown earth has turned a strange gray-black color. This is not normal for the archipelago, where the land is usually full of life and magic. Mal is worried that something is terribly wrong with the magic of the archipelago, but when she tries to talk to others about it, nobody seems to listen. Her great-aunt Leonore is old and tired and doesn't take Mal's concerns seriously. The people in the nearby town also dismiss Mal's worries, treating her like a silly child. Despite this, Mal is determined to figure out what is happening. She knows in her heart that the deaths of the creatures and the changes in the land are not just coincidences. Something is wrong with the Glimori, the magic that keeps the archipelago alive. Mal begins to suspect that the fading magic is a sign of something much larger, but she doesn't know what it is yet. One day, while Mal is returning home after one of her flying adventures, a terrible event occurs. A dangerous man arrives at her house, a murderer sent by someone powerful. Mal has no idea why someone would want to kill her, but she knows she must escape. The man attacks her and her great-aunt Leonore. Leonore tries to protect Mal but is injured in the struggle. With no other choice, Mal grabs her magical coat and runs. She jumps over the garden wall and into the river that runs behind her house, narrowly escaping the murderer. As Mal flees, the murderer tells her that the deaths of the creatures and the changes in the forest are all part of a larger plan. Someone powerful is behind it, and they are trying to destroy the Glimori in order to gain control of the archipelago. Mal doesn't fully understand what is happening, but she knows that whoever sent the murderer is responsible for the fading magic. She is determined to find out who is behind this and stop them before it's too late. Part 4. The Forbidden Hill and the Gateway. Back in Scotland, Christopher's curiosity about the Forbidden Hill continues to grow. Despite his grandfather's warnings, he can't stop thinking about what might be at the top of the hill. One day, he decides to break the rule and climb to the top. As he approaches the peak, something incredible happens. The ground begins to tremble, and suddenly a stampede of magical creatures rushes down the hill. Christopher is stunned as he sees creatures he thought only existed in fairy tales: unicorns, green-scaled horses with wings, and even squirrel-like creatures with glowing eyes. In the middle of the chaos, Christopher notices a young griffin struggling in a lake at the top of the hill. Without hesitation, Christopher jumps into the freezing water and pulls the griffin to safety. The griffin is injured but alive, and Christopher brings it back to his grandfather's house. Instead of being angry, Frank helps Christopher take care of the griffin and reveals the truth about their family's connection to the magical world. Frank explains that their family has been guardians of the archipelago for generations. The lake at the top of the hill is actually a gateway to the archipelago, and once a year, the gateway opens during the fourth full moon. This allows magical creatures to cross between the human world and the archipelago. However, something is wrong. The fact that the griffin crossed into the human world before the gateway was supposed to open means that the Glimmery is weakening. Frank tells Christopher that the Glimmery is fading, and if nothing is done, the magical creatures of the archipelago will die. The griffin's appearance in the human world is a sign that the magic that protects the archipelago is failing. Frank gives Christopher a special book called The Guardian's Bestiary *, which contains information about the magical creatures of the archipelago and their history. He explains that it is now Christopher's responsibility to help protect the archipelago, just like his mother would have done if she was still alive. Part 5. The Quest to Save the Archipelago. As Christopher learns more about his family's role as guardians of the archipelago, Mal continues her journey through the islands, trying to stay ahead of the murderer who is chasing her. She knows that the man is working for someone powerful, but she doesn't know who or why they want her dead. As she travels, she sees more signs that the Glimmery is fading. The gray-black patches of soil are spreading, and more creatures are dying. Mal begins to suspect that the fading magic is connected to her somehow, but she doesn't know how or why. She encounters other magical creatures who tell her about strange events happening across the archipelago: rivers drying up, forests wilting, and entire species disappearing. Mal realizes that the archipelago is in grave danger, and she must find a way to stop whoever is responsible. As the story unfolds, Christopher and Mal's paths begin to cross. Both of them are connected to the archipelago and its magical creatures, and together they must uncover the truth about what is causing the Glimori to fade. They discover that a powerful and evil force is trying to destroy the magic in order to take control of the archipelago. If this force succeeds, the creatures of the archipelago will die, and the islands will be exposed to the outside world. Christopher and Mal must work together to stop this evil plan. Along the way, they face dangerous challenges, uncover hidden secrets about their families, and form alliances with the magical creatures they are trying to protect. The fate of the archipelago rests in their hands, and they must act quickly before it's too late.